Ross Davidson performed under the name Ross Wilde, and in 2018, he landed what a lot of singers would consider the gig of a lifetime. He became the frontman of Spandau Ballet, the iconic British new wave band behind hits like Gold and True. Tony Hadley, the original vocalist, had left the group after decades, and Davidson stepped in to fill one of the most recognizable roles in 80s pop music. He also had a part in the West End production of We Will Rock You, the Queen musical. Audiences loved him. The press covered his arrival in the band like it was a coronation. On paper, he had everything going for him. Behind closed doors, he was a serial predator. Between August 2013 and December 2019, Davidson committed offences against 6 different women. One of them was 16 years old at the time. When the Metropolitan Police finally investigated, they found evidence on his personal devices that directly linked him to the assaults. He'd been documenting what he did. Police arrested him in 2021. Body cam footage from that arrest was later made public. In the video, Davidson was smirking as the officers read out the charges against him. He wasn't nervous or confused, or even trying to look concerned. That footage circulated widely in the British press when it was released, and it became one of the defining images of the case. His prosecution required 2 separate trials because of the number of victims and the complexity of the charges. The first trial took place in July 2024 at Wood Green Crown Court and covered offences against 4 women. Davidson had actually pleaded guilty to 1 count of voyeurism involving footage from December 2019 that showed him being a sleeping woman, but he denied everything else. He sat in that courtroom and told the jury it didn't happen. The jury convicted him of all of them anyway. The second trial wrapped up in early 2025 and brought 2 more convictions: the rape of a woman in London in March 2015 and the attempted rape and assault of another woman in Thailand in December 2019. So his offending wasn't confined to the UK, he was doing this on different continents. One interesting aspect of this case is the timeline. Davidson joined Spandau Ballet in 2018. He left after 5 months in 2019. During that window, and for 5 years before it, he was actively committing these crimes. He stood on stage performing to arena crowds while privately victimizing women who couldn't fight back because they were unconscious. He inhabited 2 completely separate lives, and he kept the boundary between them intact for 6 years before anyone caught on. On April 30th, 2026, Davidson was sentenced to 14 years in prison for 8 offences against 6 women. The prosecutor told the court that Davidson believed he was entitled to sex on demand and resorted to criminal behaviour when he didn't get what he wanted. The judge said Davidson had behaved toward women in a wholly disgraceful manner. Spandau Ballet had completely distanced themselves from the entire controversy. Davidson's West End career is over. He'll be in his 50s when he gets out, assuming he serves the full term. Steve Dawson was one of the founding members of Saxon, one of the biggest bands to come out of the new wave of British heavy metal. If you know anything about that genre and their iconic albums in the early to mid-80s, the band sold more than 23 million records worldwide during that decade, with Dawson playing on most of them. He also has a strange footnote in pop culture history. Harry Shearer, who played bassist Derek Smalls in This Is Spinal Tap, spent time on tour with Saxon while developing the character, and later admitted that Dawson's stage mannerisms and the moustache were a direct influence on Derek Smalls. Dawson himself said he only found out years later when Shearer told him. Dawson left Saxon in 1986 after a falling out over the band's creative direction. He later reunited with former Saxon guitarist Graham Oliver in a rival act that, after a bitter trademark lawsuit with Saxon frontman Biff Byford, became Oliver Dawson Saxon. He retired from performing in October 2021. In the early 1990s, after he'd already left Saxon, Dawson committed serious offences against a young child. The victim was a 6-year-old girl. The abuse happened on multiple occasions. She didn't come forward until roughly 30 years later. For 3 decades, Dawson walked around as a respected figure in the metal world, continuing to do gigs and interviews, and apparently believed he'd gotten away with it. He hadn't. South Yorkshire Police investigated, and the case went to trial at Sheffield Crown Court. On March 21, 2024, a jury found Dawson guilty on all 4 counts. On April 11, 2024, the court sentenced him to 5 years in custody, plus 1 year on licence. The investigating officer said Dawson had thought he'd gotten away with committing horrific crimes against a young, vulnerable victim 30 years ago, and that the victim had shown extraordinary strength in coming forward. He said it was clear that Dawson's actions had stayed with her throughout her entire life. His former bandmate in Graham Oliver's Army, the group that had replaced Oliver Dawson Saxon after his retirement, released a statement. They said they were shocked and disgusted, and that they were sickened by his predatory behaviour against a small child. They made a point of noting that the offences happened after Dawson left Saxon and before the formation of their own group. Biff Byford and Paul Quinn, who co-founded Saxon with Dawson back in the 70s, said they were equally sickened. Dawson had already retired by the time the verdict came down, so there was no active career for the conviction to destroy, but his legacy is permanently marked. The man who helped build one of the defining bands of British heavy metal and whose stage presence literally inspired a character in one of the most famous music comedies ever made is now a convicted sex offender, serving time in a British prison. Tim Ian Gross, known in the Australian metal scene as Lord Tim, was the founder, vocalist and guitarist of two bands, Dungeon, a power metal act he started in 1989, and Lord, which began as his solo project in 2003 and grew into a full band. Dungeon toured internationally with Megadeth, Opeth, Nightwish, and Yngwie Malmsteen across 6 studio albums. Lord's 2019 album, Fallen Idols, hit number 20 on the Australian Artist Album Chart. Their covers record, Undercovers Volume 1, debuted at number 1 on the Air Independent Albums Chart and earned a nomination for Best Independent Heavy Metal Album at the 2022 Air Awards. Gross was a legitimate figure in Australian heavy music with decades of credibility behind him. In September 2023, Gross was arrested in the Illawarra region of New South Wales. He was charged with committing serious offences against his own biological daughter. She was a young child at the time of the abuse. The offences took place on multiple occasions while Gross had custody of her on weekends. His bail was refused. On October 7, 2023, his bandmates, Andy Dowling and Mark Vertner, learned about the charges. They immediately decided Lord was finished. All new music that's being compiled and scheduled for release in 2023 and 2024 was scrapped, and merchandise was pulled. But because legal proceedings were still active, they said nothing publicly for over a year. Gross pleaded guilty. His defense argued that he hadn't acted out of the motives the prosecution described, but rather in what the lawyer called a misguided attempt at education. The judge rejected that completely. They said that whatever Gross had told himself about his reasons, he had exploited the child for his own purposes and called the excuse self-serving. On February 14, 2025, Gross was sentenced to 6 years in prison with a non-parole period of 4 years for multiple offences against a child under the age of 10. 3 days later, on February 17th, Dowling and Vertner finally broke their silence. They posted a statement confirming that Lord was over and that the reason was a criminal matter they had been unable to discuss while the legal process was ongoing. They didn't name Gross directly, but his absence from the statement said everything. He'd vanished from the internet entirely since October 2023. Rolling Stone Australia and Metal Injection both covered the story. The Metal Archives entry for Lord now states plainly that the band ended because of criminal activities by Tim that were uncovered in 2023. One thing to note, Gross's name is formally suppressed by court order in New South Wales to protect his daughter's identity. No official court document names him as the defendant, but the identification is well supported. The 6-year sentence matches, and the sentencing date matches, and the Wollongong jurisdiction matches. The September 2023 arrest lines up exactly with the band's stated October 2023 awareness of the situation. Multiple metal community sources and the Australian metal reference site, Oz Metal Guide, have connected the dots explicitly. The inference is about as strong as it gets, without a named judgment. He is currently in prison and will be eligible for parole in 2027. This case is the most obscure on the entire list. There's almost nothing about it in English, and even in Russian, the coverage amounts to a single brief news segment. But what we do know is enough. Deadhead was a thrash metal band with black metal elements from Mitarinsk, Russia, formed in 2006. 3 members, a drummer who went by Kasov, a bassist and vocalist named Dmitry Kyakov, and guitarist, lead vocalist and primary songwriter Konstantin Kostov. Outside the band, Kostov worked as a sound engineer for the Mitarinsk Drama Theatre, a cultural landmark that's been around since 1897. It was a good job that paid well enough for a comfortable life in Russia. He was also in a relationship with a woman named Anna. There's no public information about her surname, but a photo surfaced of her holding a guitar, which suggests they connected through music. Around the beginning of October 2012, Anna broke up with him. The news report doesn't explain her reasons. What it does say is that Kostov tried to get back together with her repeatedly and was rejected every time. He couldn't accept it. On October 8, 2012, Deadhead finished recording all the material for their debut demo. Everything was tracked. The only thing the release was missing was cover artwork. About a week later, Supermarket surveillance cameras captured Kostov buying a knife and cleaning supplies. He went to Anna's apartment that day. There was no forced entry. Police concluded she let him in voluntarily because she didn't know what he was there to do. Kostov later confessed to stabbing her roughly 10 times, possibly more, with the knife he'd purchased that day. He didn't use the cleaning supplies. What he did do immediately after killing her was take out a camera and photograph the scene. He positioned the murder weapon alongside Anna's body and took a picture. Then he left. Anna's mother found the body when she came home from work and called the police. There was only one suspect. Kostov was arrested and confessed almost immediately, telling investigators his motive was frustration over the breakup. Later, during court hearings, he changed his story and claimed he'd been hearing voices telling him to go after Anna. The court didn't buy it. He was convicted of murder. While the exact sentence hasn't been publicly confirmed, Russian law prescribes 15 to 20 years for murder convictions. He was most likely sentenced in 2013. The demo came out that same year as a limited edition hand-numbered cassette. The cover was the photograph he'd taken of Anna's body. One of the tracks was titled Rebirth Through Murder. He recorded the music, committed the murder, photographed his victim, and packaged the whole thing together. The other two members, Kasov and Kyakov, have kept Deadhead going since Kostov's imprisonment, releasing splits with bands called Black Goat and Morbid Holocaust. Using real death imagery on album covers has a long history in extreme metal. Mayhem's Dawn of the Black Heart is probably the most well-known example, but those images are usually anonymous, disconnected from the musicians. Kostov photographed someone he'd been in a relationship with, someone whose only mistake was breaking up with him, and made her corpse the public face of his music. Agonizing Terror was a death metal act formed in 1993. The driving force was Antonio Jorge Santos, who went by the stage name Tojo. He played guitar and also sang lead vocals. His girlfriend, later his wife Sarah Matos, played drums. They had two other members, who were only known by the names David and Marco, and the band rehearsed in a converted chicken coop on property belonging to Tojo's family. They released 2 demos, played on the same bill as Moonspell, which is arguably the biggest metal act to come out of Portugal, and even won a local modern music contest. Tojo had a day job as an accountant. His co-workers described him as hard-working and quiet. In fanzine interviews, he spoke out against far-right ideologies and later said he supported human rights. Nothing about his public persona suggested what was coming. On August 11, 1999, Tojo went to his parents' home in Valle de Ilhavo and murdered both of them with a knife. His father was Dr. Jorge Machado, a well-known physician at the Ilhavo Health Center. His mother was Maria Fernanda. What Tojo did to them makes it impossible to argue this was impulsive. His father was stabbed 34 times. One wound to the neck went so deeply it nearly decapitated him. His mother was stabbed approximately a dozen times. She tried to escape. She made it out to the house and into the yard. He followed her outside and killed her there. She died trying to run from her own son. The crime scene was so extreme that police initially theorized it might have been carried out by a group as part of some kind of ritual. Tojo's lyrics were found in the victims' cars, which pushed investigators further into that direction. The Portuguese press ran with it at full speed. Headlines called it the satanic crime of Ilhavo. The case became a national obsession, but the court rejected the satanic angle completely. The real motive was money. Tojo was the beneficiary of his parents' life insurance policies. He killed the 2 people who raised him for an inheritance. There were no demons or rituals involved, just greed. He confessed after being detained on August 16, 5 days after the murders. During the legal proceedings, Tojo tried to shift blame. He claimed that Sarah, his wife, had been pressuring him to commit the murders for a long time, that she was the real instigator. Sarah Matos and a friend named Nuna Lima from another band called Sulam Malam were both charged as accessories. Both were acquitted due to insufficient evidence, though the court reportedly came very close to convicting Sarah. 2 other initial suspects had their charges dropped in August 2000. On April 17, 2001, the court in Ilhavo convicted Tojo of 2 counts of qualified homicide. He received 2 partial sentences of 23 years each, combined into a unified sentence of 25 years, the maximum the Portuguese legal system allows. The judge described the killings as committed with unbearable brutality. In prison, Tojo reinvented himself. He became a model inmate. He studied accounting, marketing, business administration, and reportedly even law. He also joined a prison band and developed an interest in the stock market and told people he wanted to become a financial analyst after release. On March 7, 2017, after serving just over 18 years, he walked out on parole. Portuguese law permitted his release after he completed 2/3 of his sentence. By the time he got out, His ex-wife Sarah had already remarried. Her new husband was a prison guard from the facility where Tojo had served his time. Tojo stabbed his father 34 times, chased his mother through her own yard, killed her as she tried to flee, collected on life insurance, served 18 years, and is now a free man living in Portugal. Pyrexia is one of those bands that death metal fans know well, even if the average person has never heard the name. Formed in 1990 out of Long Island, New York, they're considered one of the founding acts of slam death metal, alongside Suffocation and Internal Bleeding. The band traces its origins back to a late 80s outfit called Mortuary. They've been active on and off for over 3 decades and have a loyal fan base. Eric Shute was the vocalist on 2 Pyrexia albums, Age of the Wicked in 2007 and Feast of Iniquity in 2013. By 2016, he hadn't been actively involved with the band for several years. He had moved out to a rural property in the Great Cacapon area of Morgan County, West Virginia, and he was living a very different kind of life out there. Shute was a self-described sovereign citizen. He identified with anti-government patriot movements and held extreme views about property rights, government outreach, and the coming collapse of civilization. He was also a doomsday prepper. His property was stocked with food supplies, weapons, and large quantities of ammunition. He already had a criminal record, including a 2011 arrest for aggravated assault on a police officer that landed him roughly 6 months in jail. The people around him knew he was volatile. That volatility had consequences. On June 13, 2016, 4 men were on a piece of property adjacent to Shute's land in the Valley High Timber Farms area. They were using a chainsaw to clear wood. Shute grabbed a 5.56mm military-style rifle, moved to a position behind an oak tree approximately 20 to 25 yards from where the men were working, and opened fire. The sole survivor, Terry Marks, later testified that Shute took deliberate cover behind that tree and fired from a fixed, concealed position. This was not a heated argument that escalated. This was an ambush. 3 men died where they stood: Jack Douglas, Travis Bartley, who was 24 years old, and William Bartley, who was 53. Terry Marks somehow escaped without being hit and called 911. Shute fled the scene immediately. An 8-hour manhunt followed, stretching across state lines, before law enforcement finally caught up with him in Pennsylvania and took him into custody. In Facebook posts that were later deleted, Shute tried to get ahead of the narrative. He claimed self-defense. He said the 4 men were drug addicts and thieves who had stolen from his property and made threats against him. He framed himself as a man protecting his land. The court didn't find any of that credible, neither did the jury. The men were clearing timber on adjacent property. Shute shot them from a concealed position behind a tree with a military-grade weapon. On August 15, 2018, after a full trial in Morgan County, Shute was convicted of every single count. The jury recommended no mercy. The judge delivered the sentence: life without the possibility of parole for each of the first-degree murder convictions, an aggregate term of 18 to 30 years for the attempted first-degree murder of Terry Marks and the firearm charges, all sentences to run consecutively. That means 3 life terms stacked end to end, plus additional decades, with 0 chance of ever walking out of prison alive. The judge said he wanted to send a message to any future vigilante that would suffer what he called profound and pain consequences. And then he said something that became the most quoted line from the entire trial. Quote, "I want them to remember Eric Shute." Shute's supporters organized a clemency petition afterward. They argued ineffective law counsel. The West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals reviewed the entire case and affirmed the conviction. He has exhausted his appeals and he will die in prison. That's a certainty. Now for something you probably haven't heard of before. A death metal band that was literally born inside a prison. Discharged by Death is the band's name. In the corrections system, when an inmate dies while serving their sentence, the official notation written on their parole paperwork reads, "Discharged by Death." That's where the band name comes from. The band formed around the year 2000 inside the New Mexico State prison system, and has been described as the first death metal band to originate entirely within prison walls. Every member was an inmate, and every member was serving serious time. The 2 founding members were Jason Desnoyers, who went by Jay Sin, and Larry Lianis, who went by Torch. Both were convicted murderers serving life sentences, and the crimes that put them there were about as bad as crimes get. Jason Desnoyers murdered an 18-year-old college freshman named Carly Martinez. She was a student at New Mexico State University. On the evening of January 14, 1998, Martinez was last seen in the company of Desnoyers and a second man named Jesse Avalos. Nobody heard from her after that night. For more than 2 months, she was missing. Her body was finally found on March 22nd in the desert west of Las Cruces, New Mexico. She had been stabbed at least 30 times. The wounds were spread across her head, neck, chest, and back. Medical examiners found evidence of sexual assault. They also found evidence that she had fought violently to survive. Desnoyers fled to San Diego after the murder. He was picked up there for a warrant for evidence tampering. His first trial in July 1999 ended in a mistrial. Prosecutors regrouped, secured additional charges, and retried the case in Albuquerque. Because publicity in Las Cruces had made a fair local trial impossible, the second jury convicted him on every count: deliberate intent first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, kidnapping, criminal sexual penetration, and multiple counts of tampering with evidence. Prosecutors pushed for the death penalty. They didn't get it, but only barely. Desnoyers received a sentence of life plus 34 years. The New Mexico Supreme Court upheld the conviction in 2002. His co-defendant, Jesse Avalos, tried separately, got life plus 62 years for first-degree murder, kidnapping, rape, and evidence tampering. Neither man will ever leave prison. The murder of Carly Martinez is one of the most documented cases on this list, partly because the legal proceedings generated a substantial paper trail. Court records from the New Mexico Supreme Court's 2002 ruling lay out the timeline in detail. Martinez was new to Las Cruces. She'd just started college. The night she disappeared, January 14, 1998, she went out with people she thought was safe to be around. She ended up in the desert with 30 stab wounds. The co-defendant, Jesse Avalos, showed a particular kind of callousness after the fact. According to trial testimony, Avalos joked about Martinez's disappearance in the weeks before her body was found. When people asked where she was, he treated it as a joke. Meanwhile, her family were making pleas on local television for any information about their missing daughter. The gap between Avalos laughing about it and her family begging for answers tells you everything about the kind of people involved. Larry Lianis has been incarcerated since 1991 for first-degree murder. In a prison scene interview he gave years later, he described what happened. He said he killed a man who was in the act of raping a 13-year-old girl. According to Lianis, the man was beaten with a hammer and then burned to death. That's where his prison nickname, Torch, comes from. He also narrowly avoided the death penalty and received a life sentence, carrying 30 years before he's even eligible for parole. Inside prison, Lianis carved out a reputation that extended beyond the walls. He became a respected artist in underground metal circles, producing cover artwork for bands like Lividity, Ingurgitate, Severance, Bloodsoaked, and Bastard Saints. His art was being distributed and sold commercially while he sat in a cell. Together with Desnoyers, he formed Discharged by Death. A third member, Rodney Dirty Sanchez, played guitar. There was also an early member who went by the nickname Worm. The band's self-titled album came out in 2010. It was recorded covertly inside the prison on 24-track equipment and then physically smuggled out of the facility. Two convicted murderers, both serving life, assembled recording gear behind bars, laid down a full death metal album without the prison administration catching on, and got the finished tapes over the wall and into commercial distribution. Whatever moral judgment you might have about these individuals, you have to acknowledge that getting a professional quality album recorded and released from inside a maximum security prison took genuine resourcefulness. Absurd was founded in January 1992 in Sondershausen, Germany by teenagers Hendrik Mobus and Sebastian Schotzel, later joined by Andreas Kirchner. They were making black metal at a time when the genre was gaining notoriety in Scandinavia for church burnings and murder, and they wanted in on it. Sandro Bayer was 15 years old and a schoolmate of the Absurd members. The exact motive for what happened to him is disputed. The most commonly cited version is that Bayer knew about an illicit relationship that Schotzel was having with a married woman and had been spreading rumors about it, though sources disagree on who the woman was. Other accounts say Bayer was an unwanted hanger-on who had been reporting the band's activities to school authorities. What isn't disputed is that the band members decided he was a problem that they wanted to eliminate. On April 29, 1993, they lured Bayer to a meeting using a mutual female friend as bait. When he showed up, they strangled him with an electrical cord. When he tried to scream, Mobus stabbed him. They buried the body at a construction site. Kirchner reportedly said afterward, quote, "Oh shit, now I've completely ruined my life." About a week later, he cracked and led investigators to the body. On February 9, 1994, all three were convicted under juvenile law. Mobus and Schotzel each got 8 years. Kirchner got 6. Because they were minors, all three were paroled in 1998, less than 5 years each for strangling a 15-year-old boy to death. While still in prison, they kept making music and released a tape called Thuringian Pagan Madness, with a photo of Bayer's grave on the cover and liner notes mocking him. The band became a foundational act of National Socialist black metal. After release, Mobus violated parole by performing the Hitler salute at a concert and taunting his victim's memory. He was sentenced to 26 more months, but fled to the United States instead, where he lived with William Luther Pierce, head of the National Alliance and author of The Turner Diaries, the novel that inspired the Oklahoma City bombing. Mobus worked with Pierce distributing NSBM music under a fake name. US Marshals arrested him in August 2000. He was deported to Germany in 2001, re-imprisoned, and received a 4-year sentence. He was released around 2007. He still didn't stop. Mobus runs a label called Darker Than Black Records, specializing in NSBM. In 2022, a new Absurd album came out with him as vocalist, which triggered a split when his brother launched a rival lineup. Both versions currently claim to be the real Absurd, two competing bands, both trading on the murder of a 15-year-old boy. Sandro Bea would have turned 47 years old this year. He was strangled to death at 15 over a disputed grievance that the band decided warranted murder. And that's the end of the video, folks. If you found this one interesting, then please be sure to give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe if you're new, and consider donating on Patreon. All patrons get early ad-free access to videos, and higher tiers get their name on the screen and a shout out. I'd like to give a shout out to all of my patrons for their continued support, especially those whose names you're seeing on screen now, particularly Alana Polden, JJD04, Rosalie Evelyn, Raina, Toka355, The Amazing Crazy and Scary World of Squishy 200815, The Vampire, Soak Pigeon, Bradley Stewart, Squall Fury, Stahlsturm, John Aaron Snow, Psychic Perk, Bohag, Peanut Mama 0724, Vampiric Misfit, Hendrik Fan 5, Sunny Hauser, Bailey Cosmic Black Metal 96, Mimi, Lagged Into Sunlight, Jack Roots, Losanna, Brandon Field, Helen Korn, Kyle, BAN, Brendan O'Connell, Adam Clayton, Cal Nagula, Edward Howard, Danny Jade, Paul Mendoza, Alex Christmas, Bella Schwartz, Belle Seagal, Stimulate, Inquisitor Zarius, and Dick the Cock Johnson and the Woodmaster at WrestleMania X69 or maybe not dude. Thank you very much for watching and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.